Okay. Today we're going to start from Reb Shimon Aimer, Huchshur B'Shchita. Huchshur B'Shchita, it's on Lamed Hayam at base. Yeah. I think Hashem not able to learn Torah every day. In the course of our learning, we should have the base of Mikdash immediately. It says like this. We had a discussion about if a shchita was done but no blood came out. It means it was like a dry shchita. The question is the meat susceptible to impurity because it never got wet? So the first opinion of the Mishnah was that it's not susceptible to impurity. Reb Shimon's opinion was that it was. He says the shchita itself makes it susceptible to impurity. It does something that makes it food. Food could become impure. Rabasi says, Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon would say, Shchitasi machsheres v'leidam. Shimon says that the shchita is what makes it susceptible to tumah. It's not the blood that makes it susceptible, it's the shchita. Now, what it means v'leidam sounds like he means to say that the blood, that he argues on the other opinions that says that blood is one of the liquids that cause food to become susceptible to impurity. So it seems like we have verses that allude to that. So what's Reb Shimon going to do with those verses? Maybe he would say that the dam shchita is different. Certain dam is, but the dam shchita is not. So when it comes to the shchita, how does the meat become susceptible to impurity? That's the shchita itself, not the blood that comes up from the shchita. So, Amar Ravasi, okay, that's what was Ravasi. It's Lema Masayale. Where suggests that we could bring a support for Ravasi. There's Reb Shimon Aimer. Shimon says, Huchshu b'shchita. Our Mishnah says that when the shchita is done and there was no blood, it says it's still susceptible, the meat's still susceptible to impurity because of the shchita. My love, b'shchita, v'lei b'dam. Means that not the blood, only the shchita. It's exclusive. The shchita makes it susceptible and not the blood. Marianne says, so that should be a proof. It says that blood doesn't work. So that's exactly what Ravasi says. Marianne says no. Should say af b'shchita, that also the shchita. Of course, the blood makes it susceptible to tumah, but the shchita also does. It doesn't mean exclusive. It means also. Tashema, come and listen. Says Amalam Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says to them, what do you mean? The blood, it makes it susceptible? It's the shchita that makes it susceptible to tumah, which means that the blood doesn't make it susceptible to tumah. It's a proof to Ravasi. The Gemara says, no, hachi kamalem. The chidam bilvad machsher, is it the blood alone that makes it susceptible? Af shchita nami machsher, it's also the shchita. What he was saying is it the blood? That means that the blood doesn't? No, he was saying, is it the blood alone that does? Means that so far we don't have a proof to Ravasi. It could be that the blood makes the food susceptible to tama, and this that we said that the shchita does. It means also the shchita. Tashema. Shemanaimer dam hameis eine machsher. Okay, what's dam hameis? This is an animal that dies without shchita. So, but there's blood that's coming out. I don't know how it died. Maybe a wound of some sort. Anyway, it dies. So the blood from a mace is not machsher. Doesn't make other foods susceptible to impurity. That type of blood doesn't work. Isn't one of the liquids. Make my lav. Is it not? Hadam shchita machsher. That if it would have been a shchita, it would make it susceptible to tumah. It's a proof against Ravasi. So the Gemara says, like, that's not a proof. It's Hadam Chalalim Machsher. If it would have been an animal that died because of its wounds, so now we're making a distinction here. We have Dam Ames, it means it dies on its own. Dam Chalalim is an animal that died because of its wounds. If then died because of its wounds, that blood that comes out from the wound, that is Machsher. Now that is based on a pasuk in Hazinu. It says V'dam Chalalim Yishter. It says the blood of a killed animal they'll drink, or which basically means a halal, an animal that's killed by a sword. the blood that comes out of it would be one of the liquids that would make food susceptible to impurity. So what we're learning now is that when we said dam hameis is not machsher, when we tried to imply that dam shchita would yes be machsher, which would be a question against Ravasi. Ravasi says dam shchita is not machsher. We said no. When we said dam hameis is not machsher, we were excluding the dam chalalim, which is yes machsher. What about dam shchita? That we didn't mention anything. Okay. Aval dam shchita mai. What's going to be with dam shchita? Lay machsher. You want to say that dam shchita not, so it means two not and one yes. Dam chalalim would be machsher, the blood of an animal that got killed by a sword, not shchita, but it just got killed by a sword. That blood would make food susceptible to impurity. And then an animal that just died, that the blood oozes out, or an animal that was shechted, both of those, the blood won't make it susceptible. So if that's the case, so l'shamina dam shchita v'kolshkin dam hameis. Why did we say that the dam hameis, the blood of this carcass, doesn't make food susceptible to impurity? But we could have said a bigger chiddush. We could have said that the blood of shchita doesn't make the food susceptible to impurity. And that would have been a bigger chiddush. That would have told, because I could have said there's the pasuk that says alar tishbechenu kamayim, after the shchita it says the blood you let it drip on the earth. Like water, the comparison that we do to water means that the blood of shchita makes it susceptible to impurity. So you could have told me a bigger chiddush, and you didn't tell me that bigger chiddush. That proves that bigger chiddush isn't accurate. So if you wanted to tell me that dam shchita is also not machsher, then that's what you should have said. You should have said dam shchita is not machsher, and we would have known that dam hameis is not machsher. So the Gemara says, actually, dam hameis is tzrichle. We needed to say dam hameis for a different reason. Because I could have entered your mind to say malikat la'iyu. Malikat malach hamavis. What's the difference if you killed it or if the animal killed it? Now, when you killed it, it means you killed it with the sword. The animal killed it, and not if you killed the animal, that means you killed it with the sword. If the animal died on its own, that means that the malach hamavis killed it. So when it came to you killing it with the sword, we said dam chalalim yishta. We said that he drinks the blood of the carcass, so that would be susceptible. That blood would be susceptible. What's the difference if you killed it or if the malach hamavis killed it? Both blood should be susceptible. So therefore, it has to tell me that dam hameis is very different. If it just dies on its own, that's very different than if it was killed. It was killed by the sword. Okay. What would be by shchita? Dam shchita would not be susceptible. I would think that both of these yes and dam shchita no. Therefore, kamash malan, it comes to tell us that dam hameis itself is not doesn't make susceptible to them. So, but I don't have a source that if shchita would be not susceptible to tumah, then that's what it should have said, because it had to say dam hameis independent of saying dam shchita, because I could have thought that dam hameis is yes susceptible. It has to tell me that it's not. This is a wound. The blood that comes out of the wound is ein machsher. Doesn't cause other foods to become susceptible to impurity. My love, dam shchita machsher. But the fact that you're telling me that dam magifase, the blood of a wound, is not considered a liquid, that would tell me that the blood of shchita probably is yes a liquid. Because it's implied. If you said this and not that, then probably you only mean this and not that. Gemara says, like, what you were trying to imply is hadam chalalim machsher, not the dam shchita. We're saying that if it comes out from a wound, in other words, and the animal's still alive, so then it's not machsher. But if it would come out from a sword wound where the animal dies, then that would be machsher. So we have what it's implying is already very clear. What is it telling me of dam shchita? Nothing. So we don't have any proof for dam shchita. All of this is based on, are we going to accept Ravasi or reject Ravasi? Because Ravasi said that the blood of shchita does not make food susceptible to impurity. Aval dam shchita mai, what would be by dam shchita? Lai machsher. You want to tell me that dam shchita is not susceptible to impurity, like Ravasi would say, the shamina dam shchita v'kolshkin dam megifasis. So why don't you say a bigger chiddush? Why don't you say that the dam shchita doesn't make the food susceptible to impurity, and then for sure other types of blood that come out. For sure the dam magifase, the blood that comes out of wound. Because by the dam shchita it says that you pour it on the ground like water. So that would tell me that it should be like water. And nevertheless you say it's not. So for sure other bloods that come out from a wound should not be susceptible. But the Gemara says, well, dam magifase it's shichlei. No, that's not a proof, because the fact that it did not say dam shchita doesn't prove anything, because it needed to say dam magifase, the blood that comes out because of a wound. Why? Because we know that dam chalalim, if it was a sword wound where the animal dies from it, so then that blood that come out is susceptible, does make food susceptible to impurity. So I could have thought, what's the difference if it's killed it entirely, or if we killed it halfway, 50% killed it? Could have thought that blood should be the same thing. So therefore, you have to tell me that no, there's a difference between if the animal dies or if the animal doesn't die. Now we get to the very basis. This Gemara here should have been said first, because a lot of the logic that we're using was based on what we're going to say later. Why is dam chalalim machshir? The blood of a sword wound. It says dam chalalim yishta. It says that the blood of a sword wound is he will drink, which means that it's considered a liquid. The Torah calls it something that's a liquid. Dam shchita nami. So the blood of shchita should make food susceptible to impurity, because it says al artzish b'chena kamayim. It says that you spill it on the floor like water. That which means that you don't drink the blood, you spill it on the floor like water. The Gemara said, okay, so that should be susceptible. What's Ravasi telling me in the name of Reb Shimon? It says, that pasuk to tell me a chiddush. Tell me that if you have a karban that gets a mum, and you're not going to bring it as a sacrifice anymore, so what are you going to do? You're going to redeem it and bring the money as to buy another sacrifice. And this animal itself, you'll be able to eat, to shecht and eat. What do you do with the blood? So we know that there are certain things that you can't do with this animal. You can't let it hang around and use its wool. You can't let it hang around and just use it as to milk it. You can't do that. So I could have thought also that you can't use its blood for hana. You can't get benefit. You could use the blood maybe in fertilizer, like the Gemara says. But the blood of karbanos was used as fertilizer. Well, I could have thought that. So it says, that yes, you can use it. You can have hana from this blood. I could have thought, since you're not allowed to work the animal, you're not allowed to hang around and work it. You're not allowed to also let it hang around and use its wool. Just keep shearing the wool. So therefore the blood should get buried as well. Maybe you can't do other businesses with this type of animal because it used to be a karban. So if you're allowed to eat it, fine. But to do other things, to start fertilizing businesses, that would be prohibited. So kamash malan, that you're allowed to. You're allowed to do this, to have benefit from the blood. However, it doesn't teach me that the blood of shchita makes other foods susceptible to be mekabel tumah. Okay, Tana de Bei Rabbi Yishmael. Start in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yishmael. It says v'dam chalalim yishta. Says the blood of a carcass that was killed by a sword, he will drink. Sages interpret it, prat l'dam kiluach. It's only the blood that makes the animal die, not the blood that comes out at the very, very beginning of the shechita. Originally, at the very beginning of the shechita, there's this blood that trickles out and then it spurts out afterwards. I guess that it's first being cut, the blood comes out slowly, and then afterwards it comes out, it spurts out. But that first blood is not the real blood that makes susceptible to impurity. It's only the blood that comes out with the force. That she'ena machshas is ram. That first blood, dam kiluach, that first blood doesn't. The animal's still alive when it's bleeding like that. So that it doesn't make the grain susceptible to impurity. Tana Rabbanan. Start in a brisa. Hashoichet v'hitis. If someone shechs in the v'hitis dam al dalas, and blood spurts out over a pumpkin, shechting somewhere in the barn. There's pumpkins around there, not attached to the ground, because if grain that's attached to the ground doesn't get susceptible to impurity. So we're talking about where it was detached from the ground, and during the shechita, some blood spritzes. The beginning of the shechita, that's what it sounds like. The hit is that first drop of blood falls on this pumpkin or a gourd. Rabbi Yaimer Huchsher, Rabbi Yaimer Tailan. Rabbi says that this pumpkin is susceptible to impurity, and Rabbi says no, it's in limbo. You have to see what that means, limbo. What does it mean, limbo? Amar Abaisha, which says, Rabbi says, what should we do? We have a machlekes Rabbi and Rabbi. Rabbi says that the pumpkin is susceptible to impurity. Rabbi says that it's in limbo. That means it's a doubt of some sort. What should we do? He says, let's rely on Reb Shimon. It's like he's going to decide, because he's going to be a middle opinion. Reb Shimon says it's only the shechita that causes the meat to be susceptible, but not the blood. That's what the way Ravasi quoted Reb Shimon, which means that the blood would not make it susceptible, which would be more of a support for Reb Chia, even though Reb Chia said that it's in limbo. But at least it's not what Rebbe said, where it says it's definitely susceptible. So we will have a majority against the minority. The majority would be Reb Chia and Reb Shimon versus Rebbe. Amar Rav Papa explains that Hakol Maidim, both Rebbe and Reb Chia would agree, Hecha di Isa Ledam, Mitchila Vatsaif, Kuli Amalei Pligi de Machsher. Look, he did a full shechita here. If the blood, that original blood that oozed out of the animal at the beginning of the shechita, that fell on the pumpkin, if that blood would be on the pumpkin the entire time, from the beginning of the shechita till the end, if that original blood would stay there, then we would say that the animal is susceptible, because they would argue with Reb Shimon. They would say that the blood of shechita does make it susceptible. Talking about where the blood got wiped off in the middle of the shechita. Rebbe says, what's the difference? It's all one shechita. The beginning of the shechita, the end of the shechita, and dam shechita makes it susceptible to impurity. So therefore, it's considered dam shechita. Ayah got wiped off at the end. So what? It was on at once. Once it's on at once, it makes it susceptible. By dam shechita, this is considered dam shechita. Reb Chia Sava, Reb Chia holds. Eina l'shchita el b'seif. By damaku. When does the shechita take place? Everything that's preliminary to the beginning parts of the shechita is all not the shechita. The shechita is only the very last cut of when it goes over 50% of the siman. That's considered the shechita. Everything else is just preliminary. That's not part of the shechita. So therefore, the blood that came out originally from the shechita is not the shechita. So therefore, that blood won't make it susceptible. So why did Rav Chia say toilen? My toilen. What does it mean toilen that it's in limbo? It says toilen hadavar ad gemar shechita. You have to wait till the end of the shechita. If the blood is still there at the end of the shechita, then machsher, because the blood turns over into dam shechita. If not, then if the blood got wiped off, then we say that at the time that it was on it, it wasn't considered shechita. Somehow, retroactively, at the end of the shechita, it goes back and then we view it as if it's all of the shechita. But originally, if it's only on it before the end of the shechita, then we would say that it wasn't considered the shechita. Okay. What do they mean that they're going to paskin like Reb Shimon? We're going to rely on Reb Shimon that says that the blood doesn't make it susceptible. because Reb Shimon there's a problem here. We're going to rely on Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon actually argues on Reb Chia because Reb Chia holds that the blood does make it susceptible. Reb Shimon holds that it doesn't. So what do you mean we're going to compare up the two, Reb Chia and Reb Shimon? Then they're not compatible. Reb Shimon Reb Shimon says that the blood of Shechita doesn't make it susceptible. Reb Chia says it does. It says B'niskanach miyu ashvu bahadadi. When it's wiped off, in practicality they both agree. In logic they don't agree. In practicality they'll agree. In practicality, if it got wiped off before the end of the Shechita, they'll both agree that it's not machshir. Why? Reb Shimon says because it's never machshir, and Reb Chia says because that wasn't the blood of the Shechita. They're very different. But that's only in logic. But when it comes to the practical, they hold exactly the same. And apparently, when it comes to creating the halacha, we're going to look at the practical over the logic, which is a big chiddush. We're going to say that they still hold the same thing, even though when you look at the background, they're very different. It says Mar loy machshir. He says that the blood of shechita, that it's Marley Machshir. Both of them hold that it's not going to be Machshir. Reb Chia because it wasn't Dam Shchita. And Reb Shimon says even if it is Dam Shchita, it's not Machshir. Havale Rebbe Chad, Vein Varv Shalach Ad Makom Shnayim. So Rebbe is going to be the single one out. We're not going to consider the opinion of an individual when it comes to the majority. Rashi Amar Thailand. Rashi says that what's the pshat in Thailand when Reb Chia says that it's in limbo? It says Le'ayla mashma. Doesn't mean that you have to wait till the end of the shechita and see if the blood is still on the pumpkin. And if it's still there, then we're going to consider it the blood of shechita. And if it's not there, if it got wiped off, someone came along, the cleaning crew wiped it off, then we're not going to consider it. He says no. Thailand means it's always Thailand. It's not that we have to wait till the end of the shechita. Rashi is learning different than Rav Papa. Rav Papa had that pshat that we wait till the end of the shechita. My Thailand, yeah. Rashi says it's always Thailand. You have to wait for Elio to tell us the answer to this one. B'niskanach, and the blood of God did get wiped off. The same way that Rav Papa learned. However, Rav Chia svukim esafkele yesna l'shchit mitchila vad seif. Ayena l'shchit mit ela b'seif. Rav Chia has a question about how the shchita works. Does it work from beginning to end? Or does it work only at the end? So because he has that question, we'll have to wait for Eliyahu Navi to answer it. So therefore, we're going to say that Thailand, it's all in limbo. If this pumpkin is susceptible. My Thailand, what does it mean limbo? It says Layochlim Laysarfin. If it would be truma, then you can't eat it, but you also can't burn it. You can't eat it because it could be because it's truma tameya. Could be tamei if something touched it and it was already susceptible to impurity. But you can't burn it because you don't know if it was susceptible to impurity. You're not allowed to burn truma tahira. You're not allowed to burn truma tahira. You can't eat it because maybe it's tameya. You're not allowed to eat truma tameya. So therefore, it has this limbo. My boy Shimon. So what are we saying? Let's accept. We'll rely on Reb Shimon, and therefore we're going to paskin like Reb Chia. Reb Shimon and Reb Chia are very different. The Reb Shimon lay machshir. Reb Shimon says the dam shchita is not machshir. The Reb Chia, it is sveika. Could be it is machshir. We just don't know. It says l'inyan. The question is because it's. Do we say that the yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'atzeif? This was the beginning of the shchita. If it was the end of the shchita, Reb Chia would hold that it's machshir. Exactly the opposite of Reb Shimon. Why? How could we put the two together? So the Gemara explains, like we said before, l'inyan shrei from yoshava adadi. When it comes to burning, they actually hold the same thing. When it comes to the practical part, do we have to burn the truma? They hold the same thing. Mar leisarfi, Reb Chia would not burn it because it's a suffix. And Mar leisarfi, and Reb Shimon wouldn't burn it because it's a vaday, not tummy. And you're not allowed to burn truma, that's not tummy. So Havale Rebbe Chad vein dvar shalach makom shnayim. So therefore, Rebbe is the individual opinion, the single opinion. But we don't consider that. Bachi Kamar, Rashi takes out these words. Rashi says that that's not necessary to say that. But whatever the case is, so over here, Reb Chia says Thailand. We're going to rely on Reb Chia because of Reb Shimon would agree with him, at least in this case, that you don't You don't burn it, which is not like Reb. Okay, by Reb Shimon ben Lakish. Shimon ben Lakish has a question. It's a totally new topic. Sarid shel menachis. If part of the carbon mincha did not get mixed well with the oil, so mincha is flour and oil, and here there's like a clump somewhere in there that did not get mixed well. Now, do we say that it's susceptible to impurity, that clump? Normally we say that grain needs to get wet. So oil is one of the mashkeh, but the only thing is that here we have another concept called chibas hakodesh, the belovedness of that it's a sacrifice, that it's an offering, that it's consecrated. That itself should make it susceptible to impurity. So we say mainim by rishon v'sheni, ain't mainim by rishon v'sheni. We're acknowledging that chibas hakodesh would make it susceptible to impurity. The question is, does chibas hakodesh, this new concept, usually in order to become susceptible, it needs to get wet? Now we're saying that it doesn't need to get wet. It's a sacrifice. It's good. It's good on its own. Now the question is, but what about if it touches something else? Do we say that it's just like a regular susceptible to impurity, that it can give off impurity? Do we say chibas hakodesh only makes it susceptible to impurity for itself? Well, mainim by rishon v'sheni means, do you count the 1 and 2 offspring from this impurity itself? Because usually impurity can give off. Do we say that same thing with this, that it can also give off impurity? Do we say that chibas hakodesh only makes itself impure? But to count what it can give off to others, we don't say that. Maybe no, it's susceptible to impurity. It's just like everything else, and we'll say that it will give off the impurity. Amar Rabbi Lazar. So Rabbi Lazar says, "Tashema, come and listen." The pasuk says, "Mikala oichal asher yeyachal." From any food that will be eaten, that water comes on it, will be impure. That's what the pasuk says. Oichal haba b'mayim hochsher. Oichal, food that gets wet, is susceptible to impurity. If it's not, it didn't get wet, then it's not susceptible to impurity. So, since this little piece, this clod of this flour, of this chunk of flour that didn't get wet, so therefore, it's based on the pasuk, it shouldn't be susceptible to impurity. Gemara says, "Atar Reb Shimon ben Lakish lesle yochel haba b'mayim." Shimon ben Lakish hachi kami b'ayla. You don't think Reb Shimon holds of that? That he doesn't know that it has to get wet? Well, Reb Shimon ben Lakish was asking with something else. Chibas hakodesh keichel haba b'mayim dami yailai. He's asking about the concept of chibas hakodesh, is that considered like getting wet, or is it not considered like getting wet? We know that chibas hakodesh would make it tummy. The question is, does it make it that tummy that it can give off impurity? There's no question from the brisa. Rabbi Lazar Nami. Why did Rabbi Lazar even quote this brisa? Miyasure de Kroik Amar. He was saying that there is an extra pasuk here. Michti. Ksiv v'chiyut and mayim alzera. Alzera. It says if the water is placed on the grain, and something in a carcass touches it, then it becomes tummy. So we learn about water. And then it says, any food that is eaten that water comes on it has another pasuk. So lamali, why do I need two psukim, two references to the water going on the grain or onto food? Probably the fact that it says it twice is coming to tell me that chibas hakodesh, the belovedness of being a sacrifice, an offering, that doesn't do it. That won't make it susceptible. Where says light? The pasuk of Mikol Eichel is not teaching me that. It's coming to teach me something else. It's coming to teach me it's coming to tell me what type of impurity touches it. It could be a corpse touches it. It could be a sheretz, which is a creeping creature that's also dead, touches it. It could be a human corpse, or it could be a sheretz. It's richi. And I need to have both of these to tell me, both of these psukim to tell me this, each one, its individual halacha. Because diashminan tumas meis, if it would only tell me tumas meis, I would think that dafka by over there hasam the boy hechsher mishum the matam kadash. I would could have said that a tumas mace doesn't give off impurity if it's the size of a lentil. It needs to be a kazayas. I could have thought that since the tumas sheretz, the piece of the sheretz that imparts impurity could be the size of a lentil, so small. So I would think that maybe is stricter, and that's why. And over there, you don't need the other item to get wet in order to give off impurity. I could have thought that because it gives off impurity from such a small amount, I could have thought that it doesn't need to get wet. V'yashmi'inan sheretz, if it would only say sheretz, yishum blemetam to I could have thought that that needs to get wet because it's not such a strong impurity. It doesn't give off impurity for 7 days like a corpse. Aval mace to mashiva, but a mace that does give off impurity for 7 days. I could have thought that's such a strong impurity, it makes everything impure, even if it's not wet. So tzrichi, that's why I need both of them. That the halacha by both of them is that the foods only become impure if they were made susceptible by getting wet. Masav Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef has a question, which means it's a question on Rish Lakish, which means it's an answer, suggesting an answer to Rish Lakish's question. It's a question on a question, which is an answer. So Rish Lakish's question was, do we say that Chibas HaKodesh will cause that this can impart impurity to something else? Reb Shimon says, Huchshru b'shchita. Shimon says that even if the blood doesn't come out of the shchita, but the shchita itself makes it susceptible. Huchshru, afilu min v'rishon. You use the word huchshru, that means susceptible. That means that probably susceptible means that it becomes tummy and it can impart tummy as well. The Gemara says, Amai. But it didn't get in water. You have to say that Chibas HaKodesh is just as good as getting wet with water. Amalei Abaya, no, Abaya is a student of Rabbi Yosef. So Abaya tells to Rabbi Yosef, he says, Asu ke'ech shemayim midrabanan. Maybe this was just a rabbinic law that it becomes huchsher, that it can give off impurity. But maybe that's not a biblical law. Which means that we didn't really answer Rish Lakish's question. We didn't really answer Rish Lakish's question regarding Chibas HaKodesh, because this is only a rabbinic law. Amar Rab Zera, Tashema. Zera says, come and listen. Aboitzer legas, someone harvests, there's a Gemara Sukkah as well. Someone harvests grapes, and his intention is to turn the grapes into wine. Well, a little bit of the grape juice, of the juice from it comes out. Shammai Yomer Huchsha. Shammai says that it's already susceptible to impurity because a little bit of the juice got out. Now, even though you didn't want the juice to come out, and usually we would say that if you don't want it to get wet, it's not Huchsha L'Kabel Tuma. But here, there's a Gzeres Chachamim that if you would put it into a vessel to collect all that juice, then you would be happy with it. So then we say that it's still considered that it's susceptible to tumah now, even though it's just this one little grape that had the grape juice on it. Hillel says we don't make that kasera, and if you wanted it to get wet, then good. If you didn't want it, then no. Hillel is Shammai. However, Hillel agrees to Shammai. He accepts what he says. Says Amai, but it didn't get wet with water because it wasn't according to his to the will, that it wasn't willingly that it got wet. Amalei Abaya, so what would Reb Zera be saying? We say because of a gzeira, it says huchsher. It uses the term huchsheru here, that it becomes huchsher. becomes susceptible, we're thinking that means that it would also impart impurity as well, even though it's not an original din of getting wet, but it has a secondary din that is considered. It's considered like it got wet willingly. So we would say the same thing, that chibas hakodesh also doesn't get wet. We would say that it's considered like it got wet, and therefore it can give off the impurity as well. Amalei Abaye, that was what Reb Zera was claiming. Amalei Abaye says to Reb Zera, Asu kech shemayim midrabanan. They made it like it got wet, but that's only rabbinic. So that means we still don't have an answer to Rish Lakish's question. Amalei Reb Yosef, mina lachana chachshe b'shchita. I told you that Reb Shimon holds chachshe b'shchita, and therefore the shchita itself could make something susceptible to impurity, so therefore chibus hakodesh could also. But amitli, and you told me back, Reb Yosef is claiming to Abai. You responded to me, kech shemayim, asu kech shemayim. It's only rabbinic. Amalach Reb Zera says the same thing that he says regarding if a grape gets wet with the grape juice that comes out, Barmetle, and you told him Asu Kech Shemaim. Give him the same thing. The Reb Shimon ben Lakish Nami. Maybe Reb Shimon ben Lakish, his whole question was also the same thing, Asu Kech Shemayim. Maybe his question was, does it work with the Rabbanan? Amalei, after Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Litlais Kami Bailei. I think Reb Shimon ben Lakish was asking, should we leave it in limbo? Because if it's rabbinically impure, then you can't burn it. He was asking if it's biblically impure, and should we burn it? Michlal, based on what Abaye was saying, that Rish Lakish's question is, will we end up burning things that truma, that this chibas hakodesh, that this little piece of flour that didn't get the oil, didn't mix with it. Should we burn things that this touches? That's Rish Lakish's question. Obviously, he's accepting that chibas hakodesh is a din deraisa. Michlal, the chibas hakodesh deraisa. Minolan. Where do we have the source that chibas hakodesh is a deraisa? It says that flesh that is touched by anything that's tummy cannot be eaten; it has to be burnt. Hi basar this kasher b'mai. How did this meat become susceptible? Second. Okay. We're asking, what's our biblical source for chibas hakodesh? If it's because it says that if flesh touches something that's impure, it should not be eaten, it should be burnt. So how did it become susceptible in the first place? Do we say that it became susceptible because of the blood? We have a rule that only other blood, even according to the other opinion, is not Reb Shimon, but the blood of a korban doesn't make it susceptible, because we learned from Rabbi Yochanan that says that the blood of sacrifices is not considered a liquid to make the animal susceptible, because Shenemar says don't eat the blood, it should be poured on the floor, it should be spilt on the floor like water. Now, which type of blood is comparable to water? Only blood that's spilt on the floor. Only blood is spilt on the floor. But if it's not spilt on the floor, for example, blood of sacrifice is not one of the liquids to make it susceptible to impurity. So it can't be that it became mukhsha lekabel tameh. Ella this kasher b'mashke beis b'machai must be that they wash down the meat on the by the near the mizbeach where they do the shchita. It got wet from water. The problem is, the water over there is so pure. Not only is it pure, the water is pure. The water from the basement b'chayim, that area where they shecht, that doesn't even make it susceptible to tumah. So how did it become susceptible? Adam. maybe what it says that when Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina taught mashke beis mitbachai, he didn't mean water. Maybe he just meant the blood of doesn't make susceptible. Mashke ka'amar, but he said it in a plural, mashke, that the liquids of the beis mitbachai, which means not only the blood but also the water. It must be that it became susceptible because it got slaughtered, and it's a carbon. Wow! So now we have a source. If slaughtering it as a sacrifice makes it susceptible without the water, without the blood, it's susceptible just from that. And the pasuk over there is telling me that if it touches something tameh, it becomes impure. So we're saying we have a biblical source for chibas hakodesh. Now, Rish Lakish's question is: since chibas hakodesh is a biblical source, so then do we say that it can also impart impurity just like it got wet? Dilma Kadir Rabbi Yehuda Mishmal. The Gemara says maybe not. Maybe it's like Rabbi Yehuda says name Mishmal. Dam Rabbi Yehuda Mishmal. Gain Shahaisa Loi Parashal Zivchei Shlamim Devir Benachal Shachta Vadayin Mashket Fechala. Maybe it's like this case where he had a cow that he wanted to bring as a shlamim, and in order to get it to the base of Mikdash, he had to walk the cow through water. By the time they got to the Azara, it wasn't. It was still wet, it was still dripping, and so when they shechted it, the meat got wet. Ella miseifa. Okay, that could be the case. So what's the source of chibas hakodesh? We're going to learn from the end of the pasuk. It says v'habasar. It says anyone that's pure can eat this flesh. Why does it have to say this flesh? Say eat it. The rabbis eitzim u'levaina. It's coming to include that wood and frankincense could also become susceptible, could also become impure. It says eitzim u'levaina b'nei achila, but they're not even edible. How do they become impure? How do they become susceptible to impurity? El chibas hakodesh machshar shelo u'mash v'lo. But here chibas hakodesh not only doesn't make it susceptible, but it even makes it that it's considered like a food. Achanami. So here too, chibas hakodesh machsharta. Here too, the chibas hakodesh at least will make it susceptible, and this would be a source for Reish Lakish. So now we go back to explain Reish Lakish's question. Do we say that this concept of chibas hakodesh, that in the belovedness of being a sacrifice, makes it susceptible to impurity? That's only that it itself becomes tummy, or do we say, but not to impart tumah to others? Or maybe there's no difference. The Gemara leaves off with the teiku, because we don't have an answer to Reish Lakish's question. We're stopping at the Mishnah on Lamed Zayin, the Mishnah on 37a. Okay.